Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. On each episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. My guest in this episode is Matthew Golab. Matt is Director, Legal Informatics and R&D at Gilbert and Tobin. Matt, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, George.
So before we get into the substance of the discussion, I'd like you to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about how it is you got to what you're doing today, and for that matter, what it is you do today and where you do it at. So let's roll.
As to the last question, if you can let me know what I do, that'd be good, because sometimes I wonder. But so I'm so let's see. I entered the workforce when a recession started in the early 90s, which also it's not a great time to pick when you're born and entering the workforce, but
you should have planned that better.
No, you can't. So I fell into libraries, and so eventually studied information science, simply because so I'll try not to harp on about the past, but I grew up on a farm, and the Australian environment,
as did I, but a very different farm, I'm sure.
As a tourist, you may have views on how great Australia is, but it's a very harsh environment. And so basically, I'm a lifelong reader. I'm a complete reading addict. I will read anything, and if I'm sitting on a bus, I have nothing to read, I'll read my bus pass. Like I can't help but read. And so I simply settled on libraries to get in air-conditioned comfort out of the harsh Australian weather. And so this is very early 90s, and then my first paying job happened to be in a library at a local university, University of Wollongong, and happened to be the law library of the University of Wollongong, simply fluke. And so I immediately went into a super niche area of libraries.
Yeah.
And that was a casual job. Then my first job was in the Law Courts Library in Sydney, which is a library that at the time serviced the High Court, Federal Court, Supreme Court. And so then I was in not a niche academic small library, but in a niche judiciary. So the Law Courts Library is primarily for servicing the courts and the bar and the judiciary, and it's not open to the public. And so I was in there, and there's a long story, but I'm nearly at the end. So they had a Unix system, and this was just starting to the short-lived but significant step forward from purely hard copy to CD-based materials. And I'd had a taste of the internet at the university library, but email wasn't a thing, internet wasn't a thing. I know this is ancient history. So
but ancient history will take us in an important path to today.
That's right. Yeah. It's very important to pay attention to history and not make the mistakes of the history.
Right.
So from that, an opportunity came up at the law firm Allen's, at the time Allen and Hemsley, which became Allen's Arthur Robinson, which today is Allen's Linkletters, I think. And so I went to a contract in the library of Allen's, and the Unix system they used was the same Unix system that litigation support used. And so that contract ended, and I then moved into the litigation support. And very quickly we implemented, at the time was called Ringtail. So went from a Unix dumb terminal, purely abstract way of doing a discovery where you had the hard copies. The lawyers were very happy with hard copies, very tangible, real thing.
Right.
And you had an index, and the index was dictated by a lawyer looking at the documents, then transcribed so that the recording tape was given to a EA secretary who transcribed it. Then that was converted to the Unix system and given to us and loaded into a database. And so it was a very inefficient way. And of course, it is, discovery in the late 90s was a very different scale of, like, in those days, 300 boxes was a really big discovery. But then you can't, it's impossible to have any scale. Your scale is a linear. The more humans you have, the more parallel throughput you have, but there's no shortcuts.
Right. Yep.
Well, you can take shortcuts, but you get caught out very quickly. So anyway, so fast forward. So I happen to have a brain that turns out it is suited to abstract thought. So library information science taught me how to organize chaos. And so you're taught to classify things. So you have and my faulty memory fails me, but you have the Dewey system for general libraries, and then you have I completely forgot what
I've forgotten as well.
There's a very specialized system.
Their own form of metadata. What they think of metadata and what we think of metadata are not the same thing.
Correct. And so I see. So fast forward to today. So I was at Allen's for 13 years, G&T coming up to my 12th year. So a fair while, like basically all of my professional career has been in law firms. So only in 2 law firms and only in 2 Australian law firms. So I kind of have a very niche perspective, warped perspective on the world. But I guess I see today with the systems we have and the tools we have that it's analogous, very analogous to libraries. So most e-discovery, traditional discovery, the analogy is if you walked into a library and you were given some instructions as you got to the door and you're with a team of people, you then go to the first pamphlet at the door, you read it, and then you go to the first shelf, maybe someone goes to the second shelf and the third shelf, and you read every single document in the library. You then
not a very efficient or effective process.
You get the archives, you get everything, and then you've forgotten what you were supposed to do, and you don't know what someone's doing in the other corridor, but you can't find whatever the instructions were.
Right.
That's a lot of what e-discovery is. In you're having to. There's a massive time pressure and volume pressure in everything you do. So decisions are made that aren't always, from a pure technology perspective, aren't using us to our maximum. However, the technology doesn't always help. But obviously with today's predictive coding, machine learning models, data categorization, classification, where you can look at trends, and statistical sampling is amazing ways to, with fairly compared to the linear effort, fairly minimal effort to get enormous return in having precision in knowing you have certainty over how far you will be reviewing, how much that review will cost, and what you're likely to find in that review, simply by, if you do sampling, there is no rigid magic number of you review 6,800 or 18,000 documents. It depends, but amazing capabilities if you believe it and trust it,
Right.
and if you have the right models in place to ensure consistency of coding. Humans are creative, where we have, mornings and afternoons, and then you've had lunch and you're a bit sleepy, and so there's issues with consistency.
I know for myself, years past, we were trying to evaluate the effectiveness of reviewers. And I stepped in as part of that exercise to be a reviewer, to be evaluated. And I failed with flying colors, if that makes sense.
It's awful. Document review is awful.
No consistency
Yeah.
on my part.
It's
same set of documents, 2 times, different results.
Yeah. It's really difficult. It's a really difficult task. And anyway, so what I do today is I have a specialized team where we're basically the center of excellence for e-discovery and data. And so post November 2022, suddenly we're all super excited about generative AI and ChatGPT and stuff. But this isn't meant to be about that, because who knows what the future is. There's enormous potential, I think, to transform all business and all corporate life with as a positive in harnessing generative AI and working out efficiency in finally having technology do away with mundane, administrative, low-level, low-value work, drudgery that unfortunately clogs up all of our days. So I see it as positive. G&T, so Gilbert and Tobin, we're very focused on generative AI and understanding how can we augment our lawyer efforts and adjust how our lawyers work so that we harness it and we continue to do excellent work and just continue as if there's no change.
Are you beginning to see ways in which specific ways in which generative AI could be harnessed to those ends?
No, we have lots of dreams and lots of hypotheses, but it's too soon. It's too soon, and fundamentally, everything we do in law is so. A client only engages a top-tier law firm if they have a really big problem, and big problems are typically highly sensitive. And so I don't think we're yet at a point where have we all gotten comfortable with how do we engage with generative AI with highly sensitive client data.
Let's say we are very uncomfortable with that at this point.
Yes. And secondly, there's the awkward side of generative AI and what they call hallucinations, but it's simply that these are general purpose models trained on enormous data sets of general purpose content. And so the system is simply predicting a pattern based on the inputs you've given it, the prompt or whatever that input is, and then matching that against what it knows from its training. And so if you don't have a training corpus or fine-tuning that is tuned to your specific niche, then you're going to get sometimes fairly anomalous, as in extremely frightening results. And obviously, if you don't have enough knowledge to be able to verify the answer, it's extremely dangerous if you don't know the answer is wrong. Like if it's completely made up case law or legislation, you've got a major issue in verifying that.
Because the platform has no external frame of reference.
Correct.
It has no way of knowing what's made up and what's not made up. It's all made up from its perspective.
It's all made up, and it doesn't actually know. It doesn't understand language. Right. It's a vectors where similar words and synonyms are grouped together mathematically as positioning. So it's simply going, well, it seems on this trend from this input, from whatever, I'm going to give you an answer based on this. So amazing, super fascinating.
Amazing capabilities, a long way to go before we really have a sense of what we're doing. I'd like to ask you about what you see as the differences in the approaches taken by Australian firms, primarily the higher level ones, but Australian law firms, as opposed to ones in the UK and the US when it comes to e-discovery?
So I'll give you a biased answer. I've only ever worked in Australia, so I don't know what it's like to work outside of Australia.
Right.
I have views, but they're biased views. So
that's okay. Let's hear them.
Yes. So as you know, a creature of law firm, so I'll give you a disclaimer first before I answer, and then I mumble and not answer. But so I suspect the Australian market as a whole is a fairly high level of competence and education and proficiency in the use of technology. We had a very so another advantage is we have our federal court and our state Supreme Courts. Federal Court has had a fairly comprehensive and competent e-discovery protocol since 2007, where we went from TIFF to PDF based. Pardon me. So it needs a bit of refreshing today, but it's still going strong. Probably the big criticism of that is our market. So if you think of, I'm giving you random answers, but many fairly significant e-discovery things have happened in Australia. So Ringtail started here, Nuix started here, DDT started here, and there's another one found, Inteller started here. Lots of things.
And I'm forgetting, and another from before all of that, I think I'm forgetting who it is. But anyway, go ahead.
So I've completely lost my track of thought, but
so it's a market with a long history of innovation.
I remember now. So we've had a fairly fairly long history since about 2007 and the preceding practice note in the federal court, where all big law, royal commissions, regulators have generally normalized all of our e-discovery process against a single federal standard. And then the Supreme Court standards have variations, but generally most firms are just running by the federal court standard. And so we've had consistency for the whole industry, whole profession, whatever you want to call us, to work in a consistent way. We don't have variations based on certain regulators have different perspectives in they may require greater levels of metadata. Royal commissions have slight variations. And then you have frustrations that at the time, 2007, we were almost solely a ringtail market. So those protocols are ringtail centric. And so today, the market isn't it's still very heavily ringtail, but it's not as ringtail. And so certainly that's the next challenge for us in having protocols that, if this was in place in 2007, that's not quite, my maths isn't right, but it's almost 20 years worth of a pretty good run. We now need an adjustment, because if you think today, so again, I'm not really answering a question, but today's headaches in e-discovery aren't really headaches about Word, Office, email. The headaches are...
They're not the headaches of 20 years ago.
Other data models and cloud-based encryption in cloud things, mobile, and significant things about chat and instant messaging and recordings on videos and lots of other headaches that so our protocol then needs to and our way of standard working amongst the firms needs to just slightly tweak things. And so this is my perspective. At the end of the day, it's up to the courts, not up to me, but you've also got the headache that the whole model is based on a document. So, and that is based on the digital representation of a hard copy document. The whole system of evidence
is built around that conception.
A page. So, you've got headaches in shoehorning today's world into some way of representing a document.
A chat message isn't really a document in any sense that way.
Correct. So another rambling answer to would be, I think we've always had large teams in Australia in the big firms of kind of two streams: a project management, managing paralegals and managing resources, and the technical side. And over time, we've kind of depends on the firm. Some continue with kind of a partnership of project management side, managing resources, and technical. And ourselves, we're more along the lines of focusing on technical and using systems as opposed to having a large team with a project management as well. Project management is super vital, and things can go awry very, very quickly if you let the lawyers just be express their brilliance in how smart they are, because they're all super smart. But there are reasons why we want to run matters a certain way, simply from the enormous challenges we've had in the past, because it's all precedent based.
Right.
You really don't want to repeat how things went awry in the past.
Right. Yep.
So I think another is we're pretty pragmatic in Australia. So we just so Gilbert and Tobin. So we're slowly building our digital forensics capability. But to us, in our day-to-day e-discovery, digital forensics is largely about mobile phones, simply because mobile phones are very difficult to collect for a client to collect and give you in a reliable way data that you can interrogate and have for any future question the regulator or the other side may have, versus the initial scope when you collect it.
Right. So that's still an area, at least in the U.S., we don't have any settled protocols or approach, or widely accepted protocols or approaches for dealing with that type of content. It sounds like here too, there's a long way to go before you get there.
Yeah. And so, for example, to give a plug to the EDRM, which I understand George's kind of a big deal with the EDRM.
It's got a place in my heart.
Yeah, the audience may have heard of the EDRM. It's kind of a big deal.
I hope so. I hope so.
And so we George was on this initiative. So the last 2 years, we under the leadership of Beth Patterson, and I won't name all the people because there's been amazingly talented people who've contributed for an enormous amount of contribution. But we have the message ID hash or the dedupe ID. But the idea of so this isn't meant to be a plug to be the EDRM, but the idea of having a more robust way of more independent of vendor system. I don't mean to say that vendor is a negative thing.
No, but if you have two different vendors, each has their own way of doing things.
Absolutely.
There's no reason to expect that those two will work together.
To be honest, the same system but different interpretations or different work practices. So there's a misnomer that so you have the MD5 as an algorithm, and so you have everyone in the whole world in e-discovery has conflated the concept of MD5 as an algorithm to do a certain thing, which is to do a hash calculation of inputs and to give you a output.
A unique output based upon that.
Correct. Right. So we've got that versus that so that is a global standard, a known standard. Has some people criticize it that there are theoretical flaws in that. It's not perfect. Versus thinking that when you generate an MD5 that it is a global standard. It's not, because each system may have there's very good reasons why each system has its own interpretation, but fundamentally the way that say an email address, a sender, recipient, a date, a subject, body, attachment, whatever, concatenation of all of these things, they're all the secret source. And so from each system, and so the message ID hash is designed purely for emails. It's not a universal for every single type of e-discovery, but a way to have an additional mechanism of identifying potential duplicates, regardless if it's a single system, if it's, say, you are receiving a production from another party, and maybe in your discovery, you may receive a production from a friendly party for your matter, and then of your collection, maybe you have a collection from mobile devices, from archive systems. Maybe the client over the period had several different mail systems. All of these come to complications in, to a human, they're identical. Even in your own system, to the MD5, there might have been a space difference, there might have been a microsecond time offset, maybe an archive system detached attachments or resolved the email address, or did things. So fundamentally, they
you then end up with a completely different hash value.
Correct. So to me, that's super interesting, and merely the first step. Who knows if we have, because it took 2 years to get to this point, and
and this was an effort really driven out of Australia.
That's true.
A huge percentage of the participants, I mean, Beth is based in Australia. A huge percentage of the participants are from Australia.
Yes. So we had some pretty lofty goals at the start of a universal standard for everything, but we very simply went to
had to scale back.
So we're quite pragmatic in Australia in being creative. Like, basically, we're limited by, I guess, the size of our firms, the size of our clients, the budget that the client has, and pragmatic about. The courts are pragmatic. We're interested in showing best efforts, doing the right thing, but not doing it to the nth degree of, say, exhausting every opportunity. Like for example, you have 10 custodians. You're not going to collect by default every digital footprint from all of the 10 custodians. Instead, you're going to take an approach of, here are the parameters, an interactive dialogue with the client to understand what is their way of working, and considering the court, considering the other side, and working out where is a safe way of running them, collecting and so on.
Well, Matthew, thank you very much for joining us today. Matthew Golab is Director, Legal Informatics and R&D at Gilbert and Tobin. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, George. Bye.